Hello everyone, welcome to John Moseman Live, streaming live on YouTube and on Google+. You can catch both of these shows in the repeat broadcast on both YouTube and on Google Hangouts. Just go to John Moseman Live and you can find that and find out previous episodes that I've done. Again, thank you for being with me tonight on John Moseman Live. Tonight I will be doing an in-depth interview with Jeremiah Bannister. Some of you know him as the Paleocrat. For the first time, you're talking to a Christian audience, talking to a Christian host. Jeremiah is going to come out and tell us about his experience that led him to being an atheist, that led him from his departure, what was really suddenly a departure from YouTube and a huge YouTube following. Not really as huge as probably some of the bigger ones out there, but he had a following for sure. And his resurgence, not just as having a show back on YouTube, but also being a public speaker and being an activist. And we're going to talk about things that maybe we haven't gotten to hear him say out in public. And so look forward to that. That will be here in about 5-6 minutes. So stay tuned for that. I'd like to start off every show with a monologue, a show about, the show tonight, we're going to be talking mostly tonight about Jeremiah and his life and his journey from being a Christian to an atheist and such forth. But I wanted to talk about some other things before we get into the debate, and talking about some of the things before we get in this interview. And those things being some of the things that are out in the news. First and foremost, I want to talk about, because I haven't really talked about it since I released a video, of all the things that are going on between the Eric Gardner case and the Michael Brown case. Now, both of these situations are terrible. We've heard it way more than perhaps we should, and I'm not going to get into the minutia of everything that happened with those. But I do want to say to people like Al Sharpton, who are stirring the pot, who are making more out of this issue, I'm not going to deny that the police, especially in the Eric Gardner case, acted completely out of character. It was completely unbecoming of a police officer what they did. And we could even, when we get the evidence, perhaps say the same thing about what happened with Michael Brown. Both are tragedies. But we need people like Al Sharpton to stop making these characters into figures of the civil rights movement. They were criminals. They did things that, even though they did not deserve, they were not completely innocent, and they did not completely not have something to do with their predicament. Obviously, if you're not being involved in crime, you're not going to most likely be involved with the police, although that does happen, and I understand that probably happens more in black communities than it does in white. I'm not negating that fact. However, there's other facts to that make it more than just a racial issue. Again, I don't want to go more into this. I just want to tell people that let's let the facts speak before we make any more assumptions about what's going on. I will say this: I don't know what is going on, but there is a misjustice happening when there's not a cop being indicted. And I think we can definitely tell in the case of Eric Gardner's death that there has to be some kind of justice here, and that I'm all for that. So I wanted to talk about that because I haven't been able to talk about that in public, open, for a while. Next thing I want to talk about is what has been happening, some news lately, whether or not the United States might actually put sanctions on Israel. I'm actually one who's all for putting sanctions on Israel. Before we talk about Israel and how supposedly of an ally they really are to us, uh, let's talk about the fact that there are things going on right now with Israel that Israel has done, particularly in so far as towards things like the Gaza Strip and its treatment of Palestine. These have been things that have been atrocious acts. Um, the the way that they have handled a community and their neighbors has been terrible. Um, and while I do agree that a lot of people in the Muslim world perhaps want to see them obliterated, um, it doesn't take away from the fact that when they do wrong, we need to call them out. And I think for once, America putting sanctions on Israel might get Israel's attention to realize that they just can't be cowboys. You know, they can't just do it as they wish. They have a moral, ethical code to better improve what they're doing, because everybody can make better improvements. Everyone can get better, and I am saying let's be open about this. And before we start talking about prophecies, whatever we talk about them being our ally, let's realize that we've given them a lot of leeway, and that leeway has allowed us not to be as responsible diplomats towards the situation. And as America, especially as a country that's capitalist, especially a country that believes in the free market, we need to do more to promote that in other countries, especially more the ones that we call allies. Also, this holiday season, you've been probably seeing some billboards popping up that have been from atheist groups. And while I'm all for people having their freedom of speech, I'm all for people saying their piece, I can't help but to think that some of this actually has more to do with attacking religion and attacking church than it does promoting another side or the other. It's one thing to say, hey, atheist, if you are in need of help and you need resources, or if you're thinking about being atheist and you need resources, please, please call this number. It was not done in that vein. And to me, I think it is ridiculous that we've got atheist groups out there who are pushing a narrative that is very, very personal and very insulting towards religious and Christian folks. That in order for you to promote your side, you have to be that negative. I think as people who are trying to promote a better equal stance for treatment of people, you of all people should know that you can do better than that. And so I would just say to those who are atheists who are putting out those billboards, or people who are all for those billboards, to stop and think, what does it do you to personally attack people, to personally tear down somebody else in order to promote something? And you can come back and say, well, Christians do that. I don't think it's as rampant as you think it is. But secondly, even if we were doing that kind of thing, doesn't mean that, as my mom always told me, two wrongs don't make a right. And finally, there's been situations with Lena Dunham. Of course, you don't know her. She's got the TV show that she created on HBO called Girls. I have found her to be one of the most vile women out there. The stuff that came out in her book recently, well, there's been some lawsuits about her mischaracterization of how she's dealt with people. All I gotta say is this to people in the liberal mainstream America: she is not the kind of person you want as a spokesperson. She's not the kind of person you want to have representing liberalism, feminism, etc., etc. Because I think she is a terrible excuse of a dignified human being, and I think we need to do better than to promote what she does, because it just seems classless, tasteless, and really counterintuitive to anyone promoting a liberal set of agendas. So that's my opening spiel now. I'm going to have Jeremiah Bannister come on here. Jeremiah Bannister, as you know, anyone who watches and follows my show knows who he is, knows that he is the host of Paleo Radio. He's also the host of Banman Country with me on Thursdays when I'm able to actually do it and I'm not sick. And he's also doing all kinds of different things. He's a speaker for the Student Secular Alliance, and he's also an activist. And you can read a lot of his stuff that he puts out there at paleoradio.us, as well as see great clips. Him and Joe Elder, who is the other host of Paleo Radio, are always putting out choice quality clips. I don't agree with all their clips, especially being a few of them that come out recently, but if you're always looking for an interesting show, check out Paleo Radio. It's on Mondays. And Jeremiah is with us. Jeremiah, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing really good, man. How are you?
I'm well. You're looking quite sophisticated there.
Right. Dude, am I coming up on your screen?
You are.
I am. All right, good. Okay. All right. Dude, yes, I'm looking all sorts of dapper right now. I hopped in a phone booth and changed really, really quickly, actually, dude. It took me like 2 minutes to go from one wardrobe to the next, and I've added this accessory, dude. My daughter left a lollipop in my bag, and so I've plundered it. Yeah. But, dude, great. I wanted to say, man, I really enjoy your opening. I disagreed with a handful of things, but, dude, you've definitely got a way to spark conversation.
Mm-hmm.
On all of those, whether it's Eric Garner, whether it's Israel, or atheist billboards, you name it, HBO actresses. And actually, your quote, "She is a terrible excuse for a human being," I'm tweeting that.
Okay.
I'm tweeting it and I'm mentioning it, and I'm saying, this happened on Kamala's been lying.
Make sure I would say this. Not that she's a terrible excuse of a human being, because I'm not saying.
You said it.
No. I said of a dignified. That being the key word, of a dignified. She is a poor example of what a dignified human being should be.
What is
that word mean?
Right. Okay.
Okay. That means a lot. That one word there, because I'm not saying she's. I mean, I can't. I do have questions because some of the things she does, but yes, I would make sure that I would put that there. Right. That dignified was the word before human.
And it's better worded. It's not simply your word. It's better worded. But yeah, dude, I've been all over the place, man. I've been everywhere and nowhere, I guess, at the same time. And getting involved with different speeches. You mentioned I'm a speaker with the Secular Student Alliance. I've done 2 speaking engagements. I was inducted into the Speakers Bureau, the Secular Student Alliance Speakers Bureau. I have a profile page there, and people can find that by going online and looking up Secular Student Alliance and looking up the Speakers Bureau on their page. But I've spoken at Wayland High School. That was in the paper. And then I went to Ferris State University, and I took part in interfaith dialogue, and that was a whole bunch of fun. So I'm doing that, doing Paleo Radio. We just had an awesome show just yesterday. In fact, I encourage people, it's episode 11, if I remember right. It's episode 11, and we've got that up, and we actually have 2 power videos up. We've got power videos are our short ones, and we've got one on Ferguson. How does it go? Ferguson, white privilege, and black leaders. And then we've got one on Father Abraham, the story of Abraham and Isaac, and those are my highlights, and it's a longer one. Yeah, John's shaking his head no. Right, but it's a longer one, and my segment from that, normally our power videos are about 3 minutes. This one I allowed to go for 7.5, so you get double the pleasure, double the fun with that video. And we're going to have other videos coming out tomorrow. It's going to be the flip side, so we're going to have Joe's highlights with Abraham and my highlights with Ferguson. So that's tomorrow. And then Banman Country, all over the place, dude, like you were saying.
And we got to catch up on Banman because we missed out last week, and we had a lot of stuff. And I definitely think we could add the Israel thing for sure to this next week's slot, and that would be a great show.
Right.
For sure. Some of those things.
I do too. And you know, and we missed out on Doorgate, dude.
Yes, Doorgate. And we'll get to Doorgate tonight.
Right.
We did talk about it last week a little bit. You came on the end after I had a fantastic interview with the season opener. with a legitimate. I mean, you're a legitimate guest, but I mean, I'm talking about somebody like I didn't know beforehand. Right. Someone that friend.
We're friends. We work together.
Yeah, that I contacted, and so yeah, it was one of those things where I was able to get contact with her, and I said, "You want to be a part of the show?" And I urge everyone who hasn't seen episode 301, season 3, episode 1, to check it out. It's about Christianity and poverty, and it's great. And you can watch it on John Moseman Live. Just go to YouTube for that. So Jeremiah,
yes,
you and I have been talking about doing an episode where I got to interview you, not only because it helps me with my interview skills, but also that it gives me a chance and you a chance to talk about some things. Now, you and I have talked privately about some of the reasons why you left Christianity, right. Some of the reasons why you left YouTube after cultivating quite the following. At least it was
a respectable audience. I had a respectable audience, and I had consistent followers and videos.
And for that time, I would say too.
Right.
Because like having that kind of following 5 or 6 years ago is different now. I mean, in today's terms, you'd probably be mild, but it would be in those days, because like 7 years ago, it was huge.
Well, yeah, and you have to think of the context, all right? Throw people back to this. This was the world where MySpace was awesome, right? This was the world, if you remember that time.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the world where Zanga was doing more than Facebook games, right? And you had a blog at Zanga. You had comments on Zanga. There were all different sorts of blogs that were kind of competing for what eventually became the places known as Blogger and WordPress. These were those times, and that was, I don't even know if they do this anymore, and YouTube may very well still do this, but they had your videos, they're posted in different categories, and at that time I was doing a lot of people and blogs, news and politics. Those were my 2 things, and there were days where I had certain videos that were in the top of those categories, that I had a little hashtag, right, as being #1 in that category for that day. And I remember there being other people who were new to the whole enterprise too, who were getting a bunch of views. In fact, they were getting more views than I was. But there were times where we were on par with things, and that was The Amazing Atheist, right? The Amazing Atheist. He's a very notorious atheist in the United States, but he was somebody at that time who was also a fresh face. And this was interesting. This maybe gives the better context. I remember when I first started seeing videos of professional Christian apologists. I remember, right? Because it was a new thing. Because prior to that, YouTube was a place where the lay people would debate each other. They would argue. They'd make these videos and vlogs and replies to each other. It was very argumentative, back and forth. It wasn't so much about just a brand. It was more of a conversation in a lot of ways. Definitely more than now. But
yeah,
but that's the context, right? That's the time frame we're talking about. That's throwing you back into that place, and that's where John and I met.
Yes, it was where we met, and I got to watch quite a few of your videos and enjoyed a lot of directions you took, especially talking about Protestantism, because at the time you were either on your way or were Catholic. And had talked a lot about some of the errors being made in Protestantism that are still being made today. But take us back, Jeremiah. You obviously weren't raised. You converted to Catholicism before you finally became atheist, agnostic, or however you want to put that label. I know people in your community are very peculiar about how you ascribe yourselves that term, just because there's a lot of you with different perspectives, and so you're kind of not all on the same page. Whereas almost all Christians believe in God and Jesus. I mean, so there's some differences there, obviously, within a label, within a systematic use of that word. But take us back before you became Catholic. You were raised in a And so, as a child and as a young adult, you were a Christian, and then talk to us about some of the things that, as you pastor. I would imagine this is before you became a Catholic, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't be married and be a priest.
Right.
Unless you're in the Eastern Rite.
Right.
Right. So no. I was raised. I'll do this. I was raised a Pentecostal charismatic. And there were certain religious experiences that really stood out profoundly to me. One was a time where I witnessed to my neighbor, Brody. And we were talking. He was much younger than myself. And we were friends, and I don't know, we were in the garden or something wild, and surrounded by a bunch of green leaves and stuff. And we were talking about God, and he was saying that he didn't believe in God, they didn't go to church, and my heart broke for him, and I talked to him about Jesus. Obviously, I had experiences before that, right, that led me to that place where I would be of such a demeanor to him. But I remember also another profound experience that even to this day still has, I still have trouble with this, and that is going to a lock-in at an Assemblies of God church, and I don't even remember how old I was. I might have been like 13 years old, maybe younger than that. And we went to this lock-in, and our parents, so far as I know, so far as I was ever made aware and led to believe, my parents were never informed of what movie exactly we would be watching at night. And in the middle of the night, we began, in the late hours, we began watching Thief in the Night. It's like the creepier version of Left Behind. Right? Left Behind is a very Hollywood version of this. This movie was made during the Jesus movement. It's got the crooning of Larry Norman in there. And it's got scenes like, for example, where Christians are put into a prison after hiding, not getting the mark of the beast, and there's a woman and a man and a daughter, and they're inside this, or a child, and they're inside this cell, and they bring each individual out, right, individually to a place where there's a guillotine, and they lay the person down. Well, they gave the girl a balloon before they go on out, and it shows the woman and the man praying and pleading for her. If she goes out there, you lose track and sight of the young girl. Music starts, it's cued, it's playing, it's emotional, and they get there, and all of a sudden you hear the guillotine go down, and you see the little balloon float past the prison cell window. And I remember seeing that as a child, and literally having hell scared into me. Right, and that's part of the whole thing. I mean, to get hell scared out of you. But that was something that was profound. The last thing I'll say is, I remember when I was young, having a lot of very emotional problems. I would get angry. I would growl. I would hit things. Even with a bat, I would take a bat, hit the wall. I would take a knife and stab it into the wall. I was a very angry and passionate boy. And I remember a pastor talking to me, and I confided into him, and I placed in him a great deal of trust. And then over weeks at time, things started to come out that were happening in the church, and there was infidelity in the church, and he was the culprit. Married with children, and spending time with the woman riding her horse in front of the house numerous times every day. These stories stand out profoundly to me in my youth, but I became a Christian in 1996, in the summer of 1996, and it was a very profound experience. I've described it. You can hear it on a lecture I did for Atheist Analysis on whether or not ex-Christians were ever really Christians. You can find that, in fact, at Atheist Analysis on their YouTube channel. They made a video specifically just for that. But I converted. You can hear about that. After that, went to Bible college. I was Pentecostal charismatic as I was raised, and very involved with the word faith, theology, New Thought metaphysics, revivalism of Brownsville, Florida, the Brownsville revival in Pensacola, and then also the Toronto Blessing in Canada, and very involved in that. In fact, Grand Rapids, I was involved with a revival in Grand Rapids that was weekly. That we would drive a long ways in snow to get there, and it was dancing and being slain in the spirit and shaking and speaking in tongues and all of that fanfare. And so that was what I was involved with when I went off to college to go to Bible college to become a pastor. That's where I was. So that's all of my youth to that point.
So obviously you grew up in a very charismatic Christian ideology, philosophy, if you will, of how God works. Would you say that perhaps, I know a lot of people who are in that kind of world think highly about how you're emotionally moved by God, and obviously we're going to talk about it, Jeremiah. You're not going to be secretive about this because you've come out and talked about some of the problems you've had with some of the conditions you've had with mental health, but
I've never allowed this to be the tone for the rest of the discussion. And this discussion can go beyond an hour if you need it to. It can be a special. It can be a special edition of John Moseman Live.
Yeah.
I'll say this: I have never before made public my childhood in the way I just did. Never.
Yeah. Right.
Specifically, things to do with my anger, with my emotions, my rage, those things. So I'm opening up. I want to open up. This is the first time I've been in this position, so I want to speak to your Christian audience. I want them to hear me, and I want them to get to know who I am.
Right. Well, I'm glad, and I think they need to know because you and I have talked about this before. A lot of people, when you left Christianity, kind of just said, "What happened? Why did this happen?" And I know you've talked with on atheist and secular shows about your conversion or deconversion or however you want to use that word. Your sway towards a secular atheist mindset, but I know you've talked to the public. You've been out there before talking about some of the mental health issues you faced. Obviously, I know you were in the military and that you. I know a lot of military personnel get that from being in the military. Just post-traumatic stress syndrome and those kinds of things, dealing with high-stress situations. But as you said, as a young child, having some issues with anger and such forth, that had to have played havoc on that kind of philosophy that you should be happy in the spirit, you should always be joyful in the spirit, you should have a certain emotional feeling about God because that's how you know you're on fire with God. And you're not the first person I've talked to about this who have felt that kind of that way. And then obviously when you get to a point where you don't feel that way, when things aren't going well, when you are faced with adversity, when you're faced with struggles, when you're faced with family dilemmas, do you think that could have been perhaps, because even though you did become Catholic and you saw through some of these other things that Protestants and this particular group of Protestants have done, but could that have been the first crack, you think, towards your overall mindset about Christianity, that you knew you didn't fit in that perhaps at one point in your life?
I didn't feel like I fit in ever.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of a strange person. People who know my persona online, people who read me on Facebook, or people who read me in blogs or see me like this. This is my jam, right? This is how I can escape and do this. This is my escape in many ways. But as a person, I'm almost antisocial in some ways, right? In many ways, I'm hermetic, and in many ways, I'm miserly. I mean, I've got these weird quirks about me. But I think that I've always been comfortable with sadness. I've always had a bittersweet love affair with sadness. Let's put it that way. Like, on the one hand, I hate the pain. On the other hand, I feel bad when I stop crying. Like I want to. I feel badly that the tears are going away and that my face is starting to dry up. And so when I was young, I never wanted to go to church. I never felt like that was something I understood. But I was surrounded by people who were speaking in tongues. I was surrounded by people of all ages. You know, I've seen 80-year-old women standing in the front that are shaking, you know, basically looking like they're in convulsions, and then falling on the ground and being covered with a blanket as their jaws are chattering and they're shaking and making noises. That was a culture that I grew up in, and not identifying with Jesus and looking at Jesus more as something my dad believed in, and that I looked up to him a great deal. In fact, I mean, when I was a kid, I idolized him in many ways. I hated him and I idolized him at the same time. And I think that that's almost reflective of how I felt about God. But I didn't identify with Christianity ever, really, directly, until 1996, the summer of 1996. That was the first time. And at that time, I wasn't living at home. I was homeless. You know, I was away from my family. I was away from my dad. I was away from those cues and those primes. And so it was very much a thing of my own, and the social group that I was hanging out with, and how that influenced me. And so my thoughts were very fresh. They were very new. They were very naive. And I've tried to go back, and this might give some insight into the time before I left Christianity, where in between when I left Catholicism and rejected theism, I wondered if I went back and read my old books, you know, books by Watchman Nee or Madame Guyon. If I read those, what that might do to me, you know, if it might spark, rekindle in me something of a first love, so to speak, you know, and a simplicity, a simple faith. And so I went back and I read it, and I just said, dude, this is baloney. Like, theologically, I'm like, this is just garbage. Like, I couldn't go back to that point. So whether in reality or in my own mind, however this plays out, I felt like I went from a place on my own that was connected with my family and my upbringing to a place where, even as I left Catholicism and embraced skepticism and said I'm an agnostic atheist on this, I don't believe in this because I'm not exactly sure how we would even know anyway, but that I still maintain an opinion that some theologies are better than others, and some religious practices are kookier than others, and so right.
So this being the backdrop, was there any other particular thing that brought you to the Catholic faith that made you convinced? What convinced you to go that way?
Catholicism. You know, I want to direct people to the YouTube. It benefits both of us. I'm going to direct them to a video entitled "Calvinists Convert to Catholicism." I'm going to say it one more time. Calvinists Convert to Catholicism. I have that one. I have another one on Sola Scriptura, and I have one on presuppositionalism, one of my earliest ones, because on YouTube I was a Catholic by that point. I only have a couple of videos that are just clips of me as a pastor at Temple Baptist Church, clips of me preaching and doing Sunday school lessons and everything else.
And that is at the Paleocrat channel.
Right, that's at youtube.com/Paleocrat. Okay, so P-A-L-E-O-C-R-A-T, Paleocrat. You can just look up Jeremiah Bannister and it'll be right there in the top of the search engine. But you know, but anyway, but the reasons, very, very simply, right, this is the thumbnail, is that to me, Protestantism lacked something. It lacked what I call a mechanism whereby any doctrine may be declared dogma, right, something to be believed by all people at all times, in all places, in human history, right, that is what it is. And that without this mechanism, in fact, that I was unsure of how you could salvage dogma, right? And dogma, let's reword this, fundamentals, right? Fundamentals, that's what we're talking about, things that are absolutely fundamental to be believed regardless of where you live or what year you're born in, about Christianity. And that without Catholicism, it lacked that. That impacted Christian morality, as I think we see evidenced in the plethora of denominations around the world, Protestant denominations. That's moral relativism, right? I'll say it like it is. That is moral relativism. Say the idea that theology cannot be defined. There's no mechanism for it to be defined for all people, and there's no authority that can actually enforce such things, which I think is also implicit within the way that the church is structured in the New Testament. Even to this day, I believe that if you read it, I think that you can see where that logic comes from, and I think that that logic is strong. But those things together were compelling, and this is the last thing I'll say. As a presuppositionalist, right, somebody who believed that only the Christian worldview could make sense out of all things. It was the only worldview wherein and whereupon and whereby and wherefrom anything could be known or understood or done. That was the water in the fishbowl, right?
Right.
That to me, you could not say authoritatively that there was any such thing as the Christian worldview, using the word the rather than unless you had a mechanism, once again, that could define dogma, what must be believed. Otherwise, it's the Christian worldview by happenstance.
Right. Let's switch gears here, and we've talked a little bit about your religious background. Talk to us about how you got involved on YouTube. What kind of inspired you to get there, to get to the point where you were, because you had literally put your show on YouTube,
right?
And the different evolutions of that show, the different little adaptations of that show, the Paleo Radio show, and the many years that it's come about. Talk about how you got involved in YouTube and why. Obviously, I know that you are a mass communication, mass media kind of background.
Right.
You know, you're a journalist and all that. So, I mean, what inspired you to be this, and what inspired you to get on YouTube in the first place?
That's a good question. I think it was just the idea that I understood some bare basics of what was going to become necessary if people wanted to make a life in media. I've wanted to do media for a long time. I've been interested in radio since I was young. My dad was a station manager at a radio station. I began doing radio. I think I was 15 years old when I hosted my first show. It was called Mark and Maya. And I don't know of any, and if there were any, I don't know of many Christian stations in Michigan that played the style of music that I played. I played the original Tooth and Nail stuff, right? The original Diamante stuff that was hardcore Christian music, brand new. But I was involved with that kind of thing at a young age. And then even being involved with the pastorate was still very much about the pulpit, right? About the having the microphone and talking and speaking to an audience of people. So I got into blogging. I first got into this kind of thing online with forums, man, back when it was kind of like Facebook, but it would take a lot longer before you would ever read a response to your thing. And it would just break down into these crazy categories. It looked almost like notes with Roman numerals and stuff. It was kind of confusing. But that became the blogosphere, right? And the blogosphere was a place where I would go and I would write my political beliefs and my religious beliefs. You know, I think my first blog was about how it was a critique of the conservative opposition to the redefining marriage, right? That I said that marriage is more than a definition, and the reason why the definition is up for grabs is because the institution itself is practically a joke at this point. But that was my first one. But I also wrote political ones. I wrote about Robin Hood economics, what I called Robin Hood economics, what I called market mysticism, free market fideism, you know, all that kind of stuff. But I wrote about it, decided to get into TV. From TV, I realized that I was only a local audience was seeing me, and I wanted to take that to a different level. And that same thing with my speaking, same thing with everything I was doing. And I heard about this YouTube thing. And I saw some YouTube videos, and I'm like, oh my gosh, dude, I could totally do that. Like, I've got a camera, I collect flags. That's one of the things I like to do, and so I've got all these different flags, and I used to put them behind me and stuff, and I had these cool dapper hats, newsy hats, and so that's what got me into it. Was a drive to be more engaged with mass media, which eventually became after becoming a Catholic and not being a pastor anymore. I had to change majors, and I decided to go back to school for my degree in journalism and mass communication with a minor in political science from Olivet College in Michigan.
Okay. Now, I know you had written for the Distributist Review. Was that and kind of give me your background, because I know you have been before a distributist. You probably in some ways still consider yourself a distributist,
Yeah.
even though you've left the Catholic theology out of it. You still very much agree with some of the principles of the social doctrine, of the social economic structure and system of distributism. So why don't you go ahead and first of all give us a nice little brief background on distributism, and then tell us how you got into distributism. Was this before or after your conversion, and then and how you still remain in that?
You know what? This is what I'm going to do. I got this bookshelf behind me, right? There's a number of books that were influential over me in the way that I view the political economy. One of those is this. G.K. Chesterton, Collected Works, specifically The Outline of Sanity and Utopia of Usurers. I encourage everyone to read both of those. Absolute genius, brilliant. You know, people can disagree with him, and listen, I do. He wrote books, a book called Orthodoxy, and another one called Heretics, and I'm just like, okay, his theology is one thing. His politics, which he would insist is based exclusively off of his theology, I would beg to differ. But I think that this is definitely worth reading. Anybody can benefit from it. The other one, Hilary Belloc. They call him Chester Belloc, right? It's Chesterton and Belloc together.
And both of these guys are Catholic.
Right. Yes, both of them are. And actually, Belloc, that one's called An Essay on the Restoration of Property, but this one's called The Servile State. It's got an introduction by Robert Nisbet right here. Servile State. That, and I think that's where we are right now. I think that's a very good description. I think it's prophetic in its scope by Hilary Belloc, and I encourage people to read it. And the last one is American Born. This has some very controversial stuff in it, but these are the 12 Southerners, edited by Herbert Agar and Alan Tate. It's called Who Owns America? A New Declaration of Independence. These books, and it talks about agrarianism. It talks about the European style of the South prior to Reconstruction. It talks about the Christian tradition in a more organic sense. And the permanent things that Russell Kirk talks about, right? And so that's the kind of books that really influenced me. You're right. I was a senior editor, in fact, of the Distributist Review for a while. My stuff is still there. We can share the link to the material that I posted there. Most of my stuff had to do with what does it mean to be Catholic and American? What is a Catholic patriot, for example? I talked about a lot about Austro-libertarianism and why Roman Catholics cannot be Austro-libertarians. And even to this day, I look back and maybe it's investment bias, whatever, call it what you want. But I look at it and say, I haven't seen a good response to it. You know, I haven't seen a good response from anybody, including Thomas Woods Jr. I haven't seen a good response from him, and I've read his book about distributism. I've read the stuff that he says about the competency in the jurisdiction of the magisterium of the Catholic Church. I've read it, and I don't buy it. And I haven't seen him deal with the arguments that are made there. But that stuff's all made available. That stuff's there right now. People can go and check it out. The site's pretty much gone now. Every couple months they'll post. But there was a time where they were very active. John Maddai was there. He writes at a number of places. He's been even in the American Conservative, Front Porch Republic. And I was a senior editor with him. I got to meet him in Nassau, New York. I went to the first Distributist debate on American soil there. And so, you know, I was very involved with it. And I left, and this is the first time I think I've ever been public really with this, is that when I left, I had already gone through Sedevacantism. And most Distributists are Catholic, right? So I'd already gone through Sedevacantism, and Sedevacantism is a Catholic tradition that believes that the popes are manifest heretics, that they're arguably apostates, the modern ones, since Vatican II. And so they are Catholics at this point without a pope. They believe that the pope that's reigning right now is an anti-pope, especially Pope Francis. So I'd gone through that. Obviously controversial, right? Obviously you're going to lose some of your Catholic friends. So I was already kind of in that phase, and going through all that. And when I decided that I was no longer going to be a Christian anymore, right? That I no longer believed in God. That I no longer, not just Catholicism, but just God in general. I had some conversations with people, and I had some conversations with some good friends of mine over at the Distributors Review, and it was a hard thing because I told them, I said, listen, here's the truth, and this gives you an idea for where I was at the time, and in many ways where I still am now, is that I said even though I don't believe in God, I understand one thing, and that's that the Distributors Review has been a rather cohesive group of people. They disagree on jot and tittle of Catholic social teaching, but regarding their religion, I mean, it was the idea of an atheist, a guy who became a non-believer, and the kind of schism this sort of thing would create. There was no way. I wasn't interested in it. I wished him the best, but said fundamentally, there's just no way that I can do that. And so it was hard for me. I mean, I cried, dude. I was invested into the Distributist Review. I was invited by a friend of mine in Louisiana, and he invited me to go down to LSU to talk about distributism, and I had no clue about prices, and I told him something that I've later found to be an outrageous amount of money. But I told him, and I really shot myself in the foot, and I'd love to go. I'll make up for it and go and talk to him. I'd love to talk to him now that I have a better understanding of what I'm doing. But there were things going for me, that for my family, for what I wanted to do. I mean, Paleo radio was basically distributist radio. I mean, distributists were unafraid to go and listen to the things that I was saying, and that I was speaking as really the only person at that time in the United States with a radio program of any magnitude at all, talking about this on a regular basis. And so to leave all that, and to leave the friendships, man, to leave the people that I was close with at the time, that is hard, because we had conversations that went late into the night. I mean, those were friends. I had a couple friends there where those were conversations, dude, where a lot was invested, where hearts were breaking and eyes were watering up. I mean, were really deep personal things were being said. Yeah. And we lost that. But I would say this: through it all, I sincerely hope that distributists who liked the stuff before, that they start listening again. I think they're obviously going to disagree with me on a lot of things. That's a given. Let's just put that out there. No more arguing about that. I grant that. They will disagree with me a great deal, but I would challenge them to find someone who's advocating the kind of things that are inherent within distributism and schools of thought, even like solitarism, that not only makes mention of it, but that incorporates it into so much of what is being discussed regarding the political economy. And I'd say, and if they want to have a conversation about whether or not, I mean, I wanted to mention it to Liz, your guest last week, and say, because she mentioned how Catholic theology is theology of the family is so wrapped up into what it means to be a distributist, and I would agree and contest, challenge that at the same time. I would say
which makes no sense to me.
Right? No, there's elements that to say you're correct, and there's elements to say you protest too much.
Right. Now I know that you personally that you are more on towards that gear of towards being a distributist, but I've not heard you say a lot about it lately on Paleo Radio, at least not by its name. I know that lately Paleo Radio has been more of a religious, talking about more religious news stories and political stories that are more to do with current events, and it's kind of hard to fit distributism in a current events show.
I disagree. I disagree with that. I don't disagree. I don't disagree with the idea that I haven't cited it by name as much. There's 11 shows, and there's off-air videos people can go where I talk about distributism. In fact, the mere fact that I just showed the servile state, that book and this book, dude, come on. I mean, this is a real video you're watching. So anyway.
Okay. No.
Right, but you're right. But let me say this. This is why I say disagree. Because my philosophy is this: I don't believe you have to say it in order to say it. I don't believe that Christian bands or Christian music means that you have to say the name Jesus in a song for it to be a Christian song. I don't think you have to say the word distributism for what you to be saying regarding how a political economy should work. That is within the vein and tradition of distributism and solidarism.
Okay, well, I hadn't heard much about you talking about distributism on Paleo Radio, and
we talked about Abraham. You know, it's true. We talk about a diverse array of topics, but
so before I can talk to you about some of this other stuff, I've got to ask you a very hard question, a couple hard questions here.
Right.
The first one is, obviously we have to talk about your departure from the Catholic. When you've told us some of the emotional state you were in, and I know when on a previous episode of John Moseman Live, you talked about some of the reasons why you became an atheist, and I know it's out there. There was a video that let's put it out there first. You did not record.
Right.
You did not know about it being recorded at the time in which you were speaking. It only was till after that someone said, "Hey, I recorded you. Okay, I'm going to post this. Are you okay with that?" And you're like, "Okay, yeah." But you were not like, "Okay, I'm going to pose here for this camera and kind of do this whole thing." But let's face it, this video that you did got you into some controversy, which is something that you're becoming more familiar with, to say the least.
Yeah.
But and you can also still find this on your YouTube channel, and it's talking about. Let me make sure I get it right so people know.
Rejecting Christianity.
It's called Paleocrat on Rejecting Christianity.
Right. Okay, here it is.
You say some controversial things there, my friend.
I do.
And one of them was talking about the equivalent of reporting Jesus to the authorities, or God to the authorities because he's been a bad parent.
Right.
Let's talk about how you did some of these thoughts, because I want people to know, because I don't think you've told a Christian audience. You've told a bunch of secular atheist shows that have had you on, Reasonable Doubts being one, and other shows out there like that. But here on my show, tell me what brought you to this point, and what brought Jeremiah Bannister to the point to where you actually said the things that you said on that video. Because let me just say this before I'll let you answer.
Right.
The way you phrase things on that video makes it kind of like, well, the reason why I reject Christianity is because I think God sucks. Let me put my tongue out there to him and say whatever. And that to me doesn't, and I know there's atheists out there, it's not all atheists, and I'm not going to say all people who are not Christian or reject Christianity now have done it for that reason, and I'm not going to even characterize you. That's why I'm going to let you tell me here in a second your reason so that you can correct this thought. But I have themes, as if that is a lot of why you left. So why don't you tell us, because you did kind of left, and then you kind of dropped off the scene, and then we'll talk about that here in a little bit, about you dropping out of YouTube, you dropping out of the public scene, you stopped making videos, and such forth. But talk about your step away from Christianity, from when you were Catholic to now when you become atheist, and how you came to some of these thoughts, like the thoughts that you said on the video.
Right. I would say it is a cluster screw, and I'll self-censor for this. It's a cluster screw, right, of different factors. And I'll say here's one, and this one is massive. My parents got a divorce. And I went through a number of things that I won't detail here, out of respect for them and for myself even. But that was the catalyst, right, of everything else that I can mention. That thing was the catalyst that opened me up to the possibility that I'd been asking the wrong questions. Another one, or that I was unwilling to ask certain questions, or that I, for whatever reason, glossed over passages or verses or concepts or ideas in much the same that were bad, possibly, arguably, in the Bible, in much the same way that my Arminian friend Matt McAllister, when talking to him about predestination, insisted that the word predestination wasn't in the Bible, even though he practically memorized Ephesians 1, right? And in Ephesians 1, right, predestined. I mean, you've got this word right here, and he'd said it a bazillion times, and then when I informed him of this, his eyes opened up. In much the same way, I was afraid that was what was true of me in my life, that I was unwilling to ask certain questions because of certain biases that I had towards myself and toward people I love. So another thing was this. We'll just heap it up, all right? We'll have fun. I was smoking meth, right? I mean, it was around that time. There was probably like 6 months of my life where I smoked meth, right? I went through things in my life, and I've done many different drugs. That's not a secret, right? None of this is a secret. But I've done tons of drugs in my life, and I decided to add meth to that list about probably a year before my decision to leave religion completely. Around the same time as the divorce, around the same time as a whole bunch of different things that were going on. Another factor that was really important for me, and this is one of the ones that's not, in my estimation, a negative thing regarding my quality of character. But it was that I was in school. I went to Olivet College in Olivet, Michigan, small liberal arts college, majored in mass communication and journalism, and I minored in political science. And at that time, I met people who challenged my worldview in many different ways, and not so much from an argument as much as from getting to actually know people and realizing that reality is outside my brain, and there's a whole bunch of people here, and it's bigger than I imagined, and I'd like to meet some people and hear of their experiences and their values and their dreams and stuff. And so during that time, there was specifically, more than anything else, the study on interpersonal communication and mass communication regarding what is communication. It's a two-way street, and how that impacted my views regarding revelation. But more fundamentally, there was a class, mass communication theory, and I had to create an avatar, and the avatar had to be the opposite of what I was. And at the time, I was a Roman Catholic. I was a traditionalist, sedevacanist Roman Catholic, and so I was hardcore. And I decided, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick the opposite of me, which would be an anarchist / nihilist / add in a whole bunch of other stuff. And you create this avatar, and you name that avatar. Mine was Rudolph. And you create a canon. And your canon is your beliefs, your worldview. And your worldview is antithetical to the worldview that you personally hold. So you write your worldview down, you write the opposite of this worldview, and you get close to whereabouts that might be. And then for the rest of the semester, whenever you have a specific kind of project where you go up and you would speak as the avatar and try to understand and advocate something regarding social media from the perspective of your avatar, we were supposed to be avatars that were responding in response. So it's this exercise, right, that just kept going. And it put me in a place where it opened up my eyes to this concept called empathy. That I could put myself in the shoes of another person and say, even the person I hate, even the person I radically disagree with, or I think's a pervert or a scoundrel, I'm going to go and I'm going to try to see life through their eyes and see, are they human? And to what degree, in fact, can I find things that are in common? And I found a great deal. But all those things there, those were the biggies, I guess, with the surroundings that I was experiencing, that I was living in at the time of my apostasy, in or around the year.
So I can understand that you probably have in your mind reasonable arguments or valuable reasons of why you're still an atheist, but you'll have to pardon me because I gotta tell you, and I see it happening a lot now in atheists, especially people who are new to atheism relatively in the last 10 years or so. But you talk about divorce, you talk about drugs, you talk about emotional stuff that is occurring to you. All of these things, which are obviously huge. I mean, I would definitely have to say that emotional and mental conflict can probably have some big bearing on your faith. It affects your faith big time. But to the person who says, look, and you have a lot of critics out there, Jeremiah Bannister, who say, look, this guy, he was on drugs, he was having emotional problems, he was having other issues. No wonder he didn't come, his whole conversion to atheism has to more do with the fact that he couldn't handle Christianity or the fact that he had a mental breakdown. What do you say to the people who say that? Because just taking what you said, I mean, you're not giving, and I don't want to belittle your experience because I think that it's a profound experience. But what do you say to people who say, look, maybe the problem wasn't so much God or religion, maybe the problem was you, and your rejection to religion is not one based on facts, or it's not one based off of reasonable thinking, rather than the fact that you just got overwhelmed and it was just easier to quit something or whatever. I mean, what do you say to people who have that kind of thought? Because not only people say
it's nice to meet you, Sister Cleo. Right? I mean, well, it is. I mean, it's nice to meet people from the Psychic Friends Network. I mean, it's a thing that happened a long time ago. No, in reality, I would say this. Because that's fair criticism. It's a fair criticism.
It's a fair criticism, and I'll put this out there because there are people out there right now, and you've spoke about it, you've given lectures on it, who are saying, look, this kind of stuff makes me even wonder. And you yourself have said how sketchy the dogma was that you grew up in. Really, except for maybe the small time that you spent as a Catholic, most of the time you were a Christian, you were on the fringe. You were not so much in the more center of Christianity. So what about the people out there? I don't necessarily agree with them, but people like the pastor that called you out, who said, he was never a Christian to begin with.
Right.
These kinds of arguments, these kinds of questions, people start to kind of ask these kinds of questions. And what I have to say is, Jeremiah, with that kind of information, can you still feel confident as being an atheist? Do you still feel confident in where you're at now, knowing that I would say that you seem to be well off better now than you have been. You seem to be doing better. I know you've got other jobs that you're working at. I know you've been working hard, and we're going to talk about your return to YouTube here in a minute and to being more active and some of the stuff that you've done, public speaking, your show on WPRR?
Yeah, I was on WPRR, yes.
Yeah, and all that kind of stuff. But now that you are a little bit more rationed out, you're not on those hardcore drugs. No. Is there still a reason for you to be atheist?
Yes, but that's what. But it's a totally valid question. It's totally legit. Let me say this first, man. About the the stuff going on in my life. I know people who can say that. And in fact, there's been times where I've even been fearful of admitting the number of personal things that I was going through at the time, even up to this conversation publicly, where I've been afraid to admit certain things about what I was going through because of that retort, to say, oh, well, he's an unbeliever because of this reason. But see, it cuts both ways, because what do you say of all the people that put so much stock into Christian evangelists who make a living discussing the really rough place they were before they found Jesus. I mean, there's just no way you can't.
That's a fair point. I'll put that out there. That is a fair point.
But that cuts for atheists too. If atheists look at it, like let's say Bill Maher on Religulous, where he talks about, well, yeah, of course people having a rough time are going to become something different. They're going to become Christians or whatever. What about the person who has a rough time who rejects Christianity? You know, I mean, there's at least an argument that's there to be had about that. But the idea of changes, let me put it this way. You're totally right, dude. In fact, people have brought up, why didn't you ever give moderate Christianity a swing, right? And here's why. Because I wasn't unfamiliar with it. And if I did, the criticism would just go deeper. Right? The criticism would be, well, and then you were a moderate Christian. And you'd be like, at your behest I was, to give it a try, to give it a swing, and it didn't work. It's not that I wasn't familiar with it. In fact, most of my friends were mainstream Christians. I had, in fact, even maybe now, a great number of them are mainstream Christians, and I always found myself as being the gadfly of my social group, right? That I was always the one that was the fringiest of all of the friends. But at the same time, there was never a complaint that I didn't understand more moderate expressions of Christianity or liberal or progressive expressions of Christianity. I mean, I read the literature. Here's the thing: is that as a Christian, one of my beliefs, and even to this day, one of my beliefs is that you should read diverse authorship. You should read from people in not only different fields, but also different perspectives in the same fields, and try to familiarize yourself with brilliant minds, no matter what. I did that going back a long way, probably beginning at 21 years old. And so, and I think, honestly, I think that my venture into Catholicism was moderate Christianity, and I think that my return from sedevacantism and going to the Novus Ordo or English-speaking Roman Catholic churches, that was an expression of trying to become more mainstream. Because unlike my involvement with Protestantism, where it was Pentecostalism or it was Dominionist churches that were Calvinistic, for the most part, or there was Southern Baptist, of course, you could throw that in there. I think it's mainstream in this country. But I think that when I went to Catholicism, it tempered my theology a great deal because I was no longer making it myself. Right? It wasn't so much that where I could say, well, I can go and say this is what the popes say. Right? I mean, of course, I'm thrown into the same quagmire, but at least in my mind, I thought that this was a more mainstream thing, and I think that Catholicism is mainstream. And just so people don't know, it's obviously mainstream.
Yes.
I was also a Catholic for years. I wasn't a Catholic for like a month. I was a Catholic for 5 years. I think I was a Protestant for over 10 years. Or about close to 10 years. So it wasn't a passing thing. And I'll say this is my last thing I'll say about this. I went from being a Pentecostal charismatic growing up, and all the way through being about 19, to becoming a Calvinist in college, to becoming a Roman Catholic in my late 20s, to becoming an atheist in my 30s. That's where I am, right? I don't think, if you take out the atheist part, going from Pentecostal to Calvinist, I don't see the argument here at all. I mean, I get it; it's different, but it seems like a good step. and then you've got Catholicism, and there you are, Calvinism and Catholicism. Wow, it's an old debate. People do that kind of stuff all the time. It's swimming the old river there. But it's like, I look at it and I say, this is where I am now. Is that where I am now? Is at a place that says, if you, John, give me a convincing argument that I simply cannot get around at all. If I cannot get around it, I have to deal with it. And that's true of you. It's true of anybody. So I can't say, like, I've had atheists who are like, well, how do we know you're going to stay an atheist? And I'm like, you don't know. Right? Like, you're like, I don't mean to be rude, but what does that mean for atheism if I'm like, you will know it forever, that I will never become anything but what I am right now, regardless of the evidence. Right? Like, if I say that, it seems so antithetical to what I subscribe to as a skeptic. And so you know, it's where I am. So I don't put too much stock into the claims, the criticism that I changed my mind a bunch of times. At the same time, I say it's a reasonable criticism because I changed it more than once. I changed it. Right.
So to go back, because I want to make sure I get a couple of points here, because especially on the YouTube video. So let me put these two questions out to you and let you answer, and then we're going to go into what happened to you on YouTube and how you've got back onto YouTube and other things you've been doing lately. But the first thing is one can look at the video that you were on and ask the question, he is just angry, he's just upset, he's just throwing a fit, he's just saying, I know better than God. And I don't know if I really got an answer from you on that what do you do with people who would think that? What would be your response, especially if they saw your own video or release a video that you were on saying those kinds of things? And the second thing I want to say is this. I know you were an ex-pastor, and I know right now that you do secular weddings. I know that you do speaking events. So what is one to say, maybe perhaps that one of the reasons you became an atheist or you became secular-minded was because you didn't like the rules, to say. You didn't like the fact that you were restricted to certain things, and now you can kind of be a pastor of sorts, a secular pastor, if you will. What would you say about those arguments that say, you know, Jeremiah, he just, really what it's about is Jeremiah. It's about the fact that he, either when he's a Christian and or an atheist, he's looking for that shock value. He's looking for a way to get attention. I know there's been critics out there who have said those kinds of things about you. I just want your response on the record about that. Just to be doing a fair job on my end, interviewing you, if I didn't bring those things up.
Dude, you're doing an excellent job, by the way. And these are the kind of questions people need to be asking politicians. Right? We need to see more questions like this, because dude, these are not easy. These are asking me to delve a little bit deep and to get a little bit personal. So I'm willing to do it. First of all, the thing better than God. All right, let me say this. That going back to Paleocrat on rejecting Christianity. That's the video that he's referencing. That video was recorded at a retreat during about a 4-hour-long conversation. It went until the wee hours of the night with Quakers, with some mainstream Christians, and a handful of unbelievers, and a guy who was taking pictures. He had a photo camera. His photo camera was able to take video footage, and so he had it sitting down, and he just pushed record. And he captured not very long, a handful of minutes of me talking about a number of the reasons for my rejecting Christianity. He later told me that he recorded it. He said he got on camera. I saw it. I whittled it down, and I personally shared it and said, "This is what I'm going to share." In that, I say that I detail something that I stand by to this day. I stand by in my mind. I don't think I would have the emotions that I did at that time. But I would still say the exact same thing. And what I said was definitely controversial, and it's this, is that I do believe that I am more ethical than God, that I'm more moral than God. I think that John thinks he's more moral than God. I think that everybody thinks they're more moral than God. And I think that one way to demonstrate this is that we would never ask anyone to kill their child for us to prove their love. We would never, ever tell people to go in somewhere and to kill every man, woman, child, and animal in a place because adults were doing bad things. We would never do this. I think that we would have brought up slavery, maybe, right? Like if we would hope, if we were God, that maybe "thou shalt not own another person as property" would be a decent thing to bring up. Maybe instead of being at the well with the woman as Jesus was and talking about how he's got living water and how people won't thirst, and maybe he could have told her that heating her water would save her from a number of bacteria that could kill her, and that were detrimental to lifespans at that time in that place in the world. Those things, but the example I brought up in the video was that if my daughter, I have a 10-year-old, and I said if my daughter was being ravaged, just raped and molested by a man, and she was looking at me with her tear-filled eyes, and she's looking at me and she's begging and pleading for me to help her and calling out my name, the idea that I could ever get away with saying, I'm not going to do anything about this, because number one, I don't want to intrude on the free will of the rapist, and number two, I've got a bigger plan. You don't understand my ways. My ways are greater than your ways. And who are you to question me about what I'm doing? I could never, as a person, none of us should ever get away with that kind of lunacy as a parent. God is a dad. God is Abba. As an Abba, I am claiming that he's a bad Abba. And I say that to this day. Was I more upset in the video? Maybe. It was also like 3 in the morning and my voice was shot. Dude, I lost my voice completely, so I probably sound daunting. I sound like I'm coming to get you. And so, but no, I still believe in those things. But no, let me say this. You said I didn't like the rules, right, about being a pastor, and stuff like that. Listen, I never liked them. I never liked the rules. I didn't like the rules as a kid. I didn't want to go to Bible camp. I didn't want to go to church. I would get upset that I would go and see people. I was the guy that didn't want to raise my hands because I thought it was weird. And I didn't speak in tongues for the longest time. Even after I became a Christian, it was a long time I was speaking in tongues. I disagreed with the church on a number of things. Being Pentecostal, we went to Church of God, and they believed things like the pre-trib rapture. I believed that was just hocus pocus. I kicked at the goads of dogma. I kicked at the goads of anybody that said, you must believe this, Jeremiah. Anytime a man or woman looked me in the face and told me, you must believe what I'm telling you, I kicked against those goads. I had people that I would give a pass to. I mean, I had my icons. I had my holy men and my holy books that I gave a pass to. But when it came to people, flesh and blood, right in front of me, talking about this stuff, I was always kicking against the goats. Here's why I do things like weddings, and I've only done 2, and I've only done them for friends. I have not done them for anybody who didn't come and ask me. I've never put out a commercial, right, like saying, hey, if you want to get married by me. I've never done it. And so I had 2 couples that came to me. They both asked, and I acquiesced. I did the wedding, and I tailored it according to them, and only because I think this is because I think that it's strange that there is a monopoly, a practical monopoly almost, on marriage, that it involves ministers of the state, right, and religious ministers. And in many states, you must, in many ways, be a religious minister, right? Like, you must be religious even to be there. You can't be irreligious and be there, like we talked about on Paleo Radio with different states in this country. But I think that underlying my desire even to be a pastor is my desire to be a speaker and to meet people and to connect with them where they are. And that's why I was driven to public speaking. That's why I was driven to Bannister and Sotheby on TV. That's why I was driven to YouTube. It's why I was driven to blogging. It's why I was driven to Paleo Radio and Bandman Country. And it's why I'm driven to this place right now, right? And I'll throw this out there, and to Campbellsville University, where I spoke to a student body recently about some of these very questions, not personal ones, more theological, apologetic style questions, but to meet people where they are and to try to make a difference, to say, let's talk about this, let's get to understand each other, let's try to make a better world, not just for me, but for my children, for my neighbor, for my friends, and for my enemies, right? That this is something that we can do and at least work on. And so I think that has driven a great deal of what I'm now deciding to do, whether with weddings or with Paleo Radio or with Bandman Country.
We've talked about you getting into YouTube. Obviously, there was a time when there was a point when you did actually stop doing videos for a time. You got off of YouTube. And I know you personally have told me about some of your reasons. But do you mind some of those reasons with our audience about why you decided to leave YouTube? Because really this is a show about someone who you got into YouTube, you became popular, or relatively popular with YouTube.
Right.
At a time when people were starting to still kind of understand what YouTube was.
Right.
Back when the only videos being made on YouTube were people, crashing, and driving their cars into the ditches and then laughing at it.
Right.
But why did you leave? Obviously, you were going to an existential change on the very nature of religion and what the world is. But did that lead to some of the reasons why you left YouTube?
Absolutely, 100% sure.
Mm-hmm.
I with YouTube, with everything. When I decided to leave Christianity, here's the thing. I recognized the fact that people had criticized my leap from Pentecostal charismatic to Calvinist, from Calvinist to Catholic, and some people who were Catholic criticized my a great number of people, in fact, criticized my switch to Sedevacantism, where I stopped going to English-speaking masses in communion with Rome. But when I left, I started not only thinking about my own life, but I had someone, and I hate to do this, but I'm going to say it. I had a friend named Jay Dyer, and he and I were acquaintances. I don't even think we'd necessarily be friends, but I have some respect for him. I have some respect for his work, and I'm still subscribed to him. He's a conspiracy guy, but he's been all over the map too, and he's added to that change list, going to Eastern Orthodoxy and then going to Judaism. And I thought about it, and I said, you know what? I don't want to be that person. I want to, if I go through something and I'm going through a time where I'm questioning myself, I don't want to throw myself out there. I don't want to throw my pearls to the pigs, right? I want to speak to the people that really mean the most to me, the people who are actually in my life and who actually care about me. So what I did is I went, and rather than publicize my questions and my doubts and my skepticisms and argue and do the things that I'd done, I shut everything down. I mean, I shut down Facebook. I didn't post on Twitter anymore. I didn't post any blogs. I didn't even come back and say, hey, by the way, this is what's going on. It was 3 months before I even started back up on YouTube, and I created a new Facebook account. And I created a Facebook account, and was very selective about who I was going to deal with, and I wanted to keep it very personal and private. And I was in college at the time, and so a lot of my time was being spent with other things. By that time, I'd also I had 4 kids at the time, still at the time, and I being married and stuff, and so I decided I was going to keep it local and only talk to people face to face, classmates, coworkers, friends, family, and people I respected, and I would accept phone calls from people who I respected a great deal if I knew who they were and if I was interested in having a discussion, because I knew the discussion was going to come up. I knew stuff would come up about it. And at the time, I stopped writing, of course, the Distributist Review. This was kind of all part of the same thing. But I vanished for 3 months, and I came back, and for the next year almost, I think, on Facebook. It's a long time. Let's just put it that way. It's a long, long time. Where on Facebook, all I did was post about things like family, poetry, music. I would post songs about things, and that's what I would do. For about a year, I got involved in music. I started singing and playing guitar, and played music with my best friend Scott Farley, who has since passed away. And I went through all of that, and then it wasn't until my interview, really, honestly, with Reasonable Doubts, that I spoke openly about any of this, like where I said, you know what, I'm gonna have to deal with this anyway, because I'm doing a political talk show. It's going to come up, so I need to deal with it. And they offered, and I said, let's do it. And it wasn't as personal, it was for a secular audience for the most part, and it's a secular guy, an atheist guy, doing the the interview, and so it was different. The kind of subject matter is much different. This is the only interview like this. I mean, there's nothing else like this.
Right.
There's nothing else at all. But all of that was going on.
What shifted you from this isolation? What got you back into doing Paleo Radio? I know you did it on the local public radio. What got you back into the public foray, if you will? Overall, this kind of stuff. What kind of brought you back?
Necessity. Right. Cosmic necessity. No, in reality, I was going to school. I was getting my degree in journalism and mass comm and minoring in political science. The idea that I wouldn't get involved publicly in what I was going to do with my life was insane. I was like, dude, no. I have been going to school for this. I'm an award-winning student at this college, right? In 3 different fields. I have to succeed. And if I go out there and I try to put into practice things that I had done and things that I had learned over those years, that it was going to be public. And whether or not I was a beat writer for a newspaper, or whether I had my own radio show, no matter what, it's going to come up. You know, something is going to, something's going to challenge me to say, listen, aren't you the guy? You know, aren't you the dude that had this? What happened to you? So, I don't know. You know, like, anyway, that's it.
Yeah. So you got on public radio. And started doing radio again, and of course that ran its course. I mean, there was probably a time where you said, "Look, I know I can't do so many things at once," and it was getting kind of hard, probably for a little bit, trying to do all being a parent and taking care of things. So I know you had left the public radio where you're at, but you have since come back onto YouTube.
Right.
On Mondays, you have your show, and then you also, with your other host there for Paleo Radio, Joe Elder, put out different clips on there. And I know Paleo Radio is a kind of a current event show where you and Joe Elder talk about the events of the day through a secular, probably, I would say, for the most part, libertarian, or neutral. You know, I mean, I wouldn't really classify you or Joe as liberal, but you guys aren't quite conservative. You were probably more than him in some ways. But I know you guys got that going on, and now you've also started to become an activist. In fact, #Doorgate. You've become notorious in the town that you were living in there for a while, Door, Michigan, and got involved in a little controversy there, which has been rehashed 1 year later, because that happened last year this time.
Right.
And I do recommend that anybody who has not heard Jeremiah talk about it. In fact, you were on my last episode.
Right.
Talking about, you gave us some background on Doorgate.
Right. DORRGATE.
Yes, #Doorgate.
Yeah, hashtag that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But you have become also more than just a talk show host. You have become active, asking questions, and really a lot of people who don't know what happened with Door think of it as more you being an atheist, just another atheist trying to get a religious symbol taken away from the public eye, really, than it was you talking about
public administration.
Yeah, something that probably has to do with more about process and what is something that's systematically in place.
I think onlookers could more reasonably say that it appeared like an atheist was posturing himself for a run for being a local trustee than an activist in the war on Christmas.
Right.
Because, and I'll say this, listen, for the viewers that don't know, Doorgate is this simple. A nativity was put up, and I questioned who put it there. It was a private citizen who put it there. There was no public, there was no code or any kind of public policy in place regarding private citizens leaving stuff on public property, publicly owned park benches, and this just happened to be in town square in the gazebo. And my claim was really simple, and this is all I'll say about it. You can go back, John Moseman Live, last week and watch me talk about it. Public property on public property, private property on private property. If a private person, a private citizen, wants privately owned property on public land, then public officials have to have a public policy regarding the ownership, placement, operation, maintenance, and cleanup of said property. That was all I was saying at the time. Like that was the gist of it. But that doesn't work for the media. The media likes to make things bleed, and when they bleed, they lead. And so they made this one. Local atheist outraged over nativity scene. I'm the outraged atheist of Door. Right, even in the same video clip as me saying that I'm not mad.
Attacks Jesus.
Right, attacks Jesus. Right, and
yeah.
that's a whole story, and it's a whole bunch of fun. And the only thing now out of all of that, right, is that it's back and it's brighter and bigger than ever. It's lit up. There's a lot of other things to it. Those questions are that what I just said and laid out about public property and private property and public policies. All of that still stands, and I'm not sure. I'm looking forward to see if the Panasi Globe writes about it again and details who owns it.
I wouldn't hold your breath if I was you.
I know, I'm not, well, but I'm not holding my breath either. Yeah. Because she's openly admitted, even as the Panasi Globe, that Christianity impacts the way she does things in her life, including her journalism. You know, I mean, yeah. And you can tell it reads like a Christian magazine.
Right, and at least she's open about that. Not everyone's open about that.
Right, she's open.
At the bottom of your screen, people are going to see Secular Student Alliance, and one of the things you've become more involved is speaking. You spoke in Wayland, Michigan, to the high school group there. That's part of the Secular Student Alliance.
Right.
And I guess all those kind of phases into kind of my last question, or last couple of questions for you, and that is, you kind of evolved, if I can use that word.
Yes, you can.
From being a journalist to being a journalist who also is an activist and is a public speaker. I know you spoke out in Flint over talking about the post office and the importance of keeping the post office. And then you've talked about some other things. Where do you see yourself, because you have changed in some of the ways you're approaching some of these subjects, but where do you see yourself now going with your future, with what you're doing? What are you trying to achieve? Are you going to find yourself being more focused on being a journalist or being a commentator sort of things, being an entertainer, or do you really start to see yourself kind of branching out of that and perhaps being more of a speaker / activist, or do you find that there can probably be a balance?
I think there can probably be a balance, and where I'm going is onward and upward, right? Like I believe in it. I believe in Paleo Radio. I believe in Bandman Country. I believe in John Moseman Live. You know, I believe in myself. I believe in what I'm doing. I'm putting into play and into practice the things that I've learned over my life, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I'm trying to reconnect with people that have been lost due to burnt bridges, right? However those bridges may have been burned, to say, let's talk, let's continue to be friends, continue to work together, continue to learn from each other and benefit from what we're doing. But I think that there's a balance of all of it. I think that my studies in journalism, my work in journalism, even at a collegiate level, has influenced me in such a way that it's quite evident in the way that I approach Paleo Radio, with the idea of praise where praise is due, criticism where criticism is due, regardless of party or sect. I think that that's something that can be generally understood, and it ought to be applied generally by journalists trying to write about stories on anything. I think that they should simply say, this is what the facts are, and here's some good things, there's maybe some bad things. And let's talk about it. So I think that my studies in journalism have impacted it. My studies in mass communication have impacted the way that I view interactions with people, not only at large scale, but even interpersonally, communicating with them and getting to know them and working with them and learning who they are and appreciating who they are regardless of differences. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's kind of like, you know, when I was a kid, I really, really liked Isaiah Thomas and the Pistons. I loved the whole team. But at the same time, it would have been really silly for me to say that Hakeem Olajuwon was a bad player, right? Or that Patrick Ewing or that Michael Jordan in the Bulls that was a great player and a great team, just because it wasn't my team and just because it wasn't my favorite players. I don't think that should impact what we view regarding what's beneficial or even what's true, right? What might be right and good. Wise and prudent. And so I think we can benefit from all that. All of these things combined, saying editorially, journalistically, being a part of the commentariat, being a person who goes out and speaks directly face to face, and this is what I hope to do the most. I love it. Going and speaking to people, getting to meet them, shake their hand, eat with them, break bread with them, talk with them. To me, that's where it's at. To do all of these things is something that I'm confident I can do. I've been doing for a long time. And so to simply do this at a level that says, all right, I've been private, I've been personal. In the past, I was trying to ascend professionally. A lot of changes took place. A lot of time was needed, but I graduated. I've turned the tassels on my cap, and it's time to move on. And so I'm moving in that direction, saying, this is a good thing. Paleo Radio, Paleocrat on YouTube. It's a good thing, and I'm excited about it. I'm excited about where all of it's going, and so I encourage people to listen. If any of all the stuff that I've said sounds like something you like, get to know who we are. Go to paleoradio.us. Get to know who I am. If you're interested in speaking engagements, if you're interested in churches, and that's something I want to do, is to go into churches and to have real heartfelt conversations with pastors and apologists about faith and about life and about living on a planet where, whether we like it or not, we compulsively wake up to a world with people who disagree with us, and we need to kind of figure that out.
Right. I've been noticing, because I'm, even though I'm a Christian, I have been pretty open to being friends, and you probably have a huge part to do with that, because you are usually the vessel in which I meet many fascinating people that I have met. But I am becoming friends with a lot of high-profile people in the atheist community, and I've noticed that the atheist community is becoming more outspoken, becoming more engaged in an evangelical sense, and probably a word you wouldn't like it, maybe perhaps a more anti-apologetical sense, or counter-apologetics, or whatever the catchphrase you want to use for that. Do you see this trend becoming higher and higher? I mean, do you see this kind of thing happening more, like what you're doing, where you're seeing people talking and being open in the media?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, you're seeing it like crazy. I mean, look at how many Google Hangout shows there are. Right? Just go on to Google Plus, everybody, and just see how many atheists are actually talking right now. But you know, let me say this, man. I know that there's a lot of people who will disagree with what I'm going to say, but I'm really excited to see the direction that atheists may go, that atheism may go, that the atheist movement may go, moving beyond a place where you need the icebreakers, those boats that crash through the ice and look ugly on the outside, that break through that thick ice to allow other boats to travel through with nourishing goods, right, and stuff. And so I think that the Hitchens and the Dawkins and the Harrises and the Dennetts of the world, I think New Atheism, I think all of those things are necessary ingredients to the project. At the same time, they're insufficient ingredients to the project, because It's one thing to say this is what I don't believe in and this is what I do believe in. And all of those men have said what they do believe in too. I don't want to minimize that. But the emphasis of the counter-apologetic is to say what you don't believe. Right? The emphasis of the counter-apologetic is to say, you know, this is why religion's wrong. This is what's stupid. This is what is right. This is why this needs to change. To go into a place where you say, all right, let's just say this. We've all seen all these debates, right? For those of us who have, right? For those of us who've watched hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of debates on these issues, and we've exhausted books and we've exhausted websites, what now? Right? Like, what do we then do? I mean, this is a powerful question in Christian apologetics, and I think it's got to be a big one in skeptical counter-apologetics. What shall we then do? And I'm excited to see that more and more people, including those of us at Paleo Radio, in abandonment country, saying let's pick this up. Let's begin hashing this out, debating it, and saying, in a world where everything is not going our way, right? In a world where you wake up and there's people who disagree with you who still exist, what do we then do? And I'm excited to see, even anticipating, I guess, in many ways, what I'm going to see and what everyone's going to see out of the atheist movement and out of atheists in the future, and the greater emphasis you're going to begin seeing on collective efforts that put them face to face with people they happen to disagree with.
Right. Well, this is what I'm going to start doing on my shows. I try to give people the last word. I'll be giving you the last word, allow you to plug your stuff, and do all that kind of thing. Let you say whatever you want to say. Give you a little open forum there, and I'll also have you answer one last question, and I'll get to that here in a second. But first, I want to let everyone know and thank them for joining us tonight on John Moseman Live, JML. You can find out more information at johnmoseman.net and on my Facebook, John Moseman Live. Check out YouTube, John Moseman Live, and you'll find a lot of stuff that I'm on. Also, check out Bannister Country. We're on Thursday nights. And also, if you're interested in more about how Jeremiah sees atheism, I had a great interview with him from Season 1. It was special episode 3 and 4. And I also had Christopher Tanner from Atheist Analysis on there. And we kind of talked about the future of atheism, also where atheism is going. So I encourage you all to check that out as well as checking out Jeremiah's information as well. And so Jeremiah will let you say a couple of things, and then I'll say goodnight, and then we will call it good for the night. But I want to ask you this. When are you going to ever write a book? Are we going to see a book from and then I will also ask you this one. If you could give us, besides the word, because I know the obvious word, if someone says, well, is there one word to describe who you are? Obviously, we would both say Paleocrat.
Right.
But maybe in a few more words or in a sentence, describe who Jeremiah Bannister is to people so they have an idea.
Right.
Take a couple of questions, and then you have a little bit of the last of the show.
The first question, a book, right? This is something I've mulled over for a long time. In fact, I've wanted to write a book. I've talked about it. I've threatened to do it for years. And people, there was even a time where I was thinking, well, maybe if I just kind of pressure myself publicly, like that will get me to do it. That was about as successful as my jihads on fat that I did in my life to try to say I'm going to lose weight. It didn't necessarily work out as planned. But I would love to write a book. In fact, I'd love to write a book. There's a number of topics that I've debated over the years. I have people who tell me that I ought to write a story about my life. And that it seems like a real narcissistic thing to do. But I've had a decent number of people. I mean, in fact, it's fair to say I've had hundreds of people in my life that have come up and talked to me about that in a very serious way and talked about how the experiences in my life and the way that they connected with me, it was meaningful to them. People have said about deconversion, but I would be more interested in a kind of Russell-esque, why I'm not a Christian type thing. I mean, that might be a decent thing to write, and I'd like to write one about the political economy and maybe even one about media. I mean, I've got a number of different topics that I'm very, very interested in that I'd love to write about. and to have published. And just so people know, I have published poetry. I have, in fact, I'm an award-winning poet at Olivet College. I won their award for creative art or creative writing for my poetry. I think altogether I have 18 or 19 pieces of poetry and prose and speculative fiction that have been published in the Garfield Lake Review. So you can read that. And a lot of that gives you a pretty good idea as to where I'm coming from in various different places in my life, and a lot of people have really enjoyed it. In fact, Campbellsville University, that was one of the things they did, was to question me about my poetry, and specifically a poem entitled Spectacular Unfortunate that a song was later derived from. On to the second question, and let me think here. How do I define myself in a short bit? Spectacular unfortunate, right? Spectacularly unfortunate, right? No, I would say, you know, that authentic, I hope. You know, sincere, I hope. Caring. I would hope those things. Stubborn, for sure. Right? Like, I mean, there's a whole bunch of single words and descriptive phrases you can use to describe me, but my hope is that through it all, that I have retained a love of people, and a love specifically of people who are different, who have different beliefs than me, right? The underdogs in many ways. A lot of my friends are underdogs. A lot of my friends are the freaks and the geeks, you know, that that's what I am. And so I would hope that people would see that and take it for what it is and realize, you know, don't take me too seriously. Right? Like in some ways, don't take me too seriously, and at the same time take me dead seriously, because there are things about me that I'm very serious about and that I care a great deal about. At the same time, I am what I am, right? Like, I mean, it is what it is. And so I don't know how that answers the question. That has to be the most interesting question I've ever heard in my life. To just in one word or one sentence, how would you describe yourself? Boy, you're good, John.
All right, so why don't you go ahead and plug, tell people about where they can find more information about you. I know we've said it before, but just to close it up, and then we will say goodbye.
Okay, once again, I'm Jeremiah Bannister. I am one of the hosts of Paleo Radio, along with Joe Elder, a dear friend of mine. We host it every Monday at 11:30 a.m. It's on youtube.com/Paleocrat. In fact, if you look up Paleocrat, Paleocrat, if you look that up, or look up my name that's been on the screen this entire time, you're going to find a whole bunch of stuff. Right? You're gonna find stuff for years worth of stuff online, especially in the video section. You can go in the video section and you can find tons and tons of videos. And so not only Paleo Radio on Mondays from 11:30 to 12:30, but also Bandman Country. Bandman Country is on Thursdays, and that would be what time are we on, John, for Bandman Country?
It's 9 p.m. Eastern. Same time as tonight's show.
Yeah, same time, 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And it's a new program. It's an interfaith program. You've got John and myself, and we talk about. We've been talking a lot about religion. In fact, I'm excited about that, to delve deeper into theology, apologetics, counter-apologetics, that kind of thing, and to have really sincere discussions with each other over underlying foundational issues that precede a lot of the conversation you see in current events. And the last thing I'll say is this, is that I am a speaker. I am part of the Speakers Bureau at the Secular Student Alliance, and you can find that by going to the Secular Student Alliance website and checking out their Speakers Bureau. In fact, it's got a bio of me. You can see a picture of me in my Doctor Who scarf, and it gives a little bio of my life, kind of a very thumbnail sketch as to what I've been through, and then what I talk about, what is of value to a specific group. And so that's my involvement with Secular Student Alliance, and whether it's with Secular Student Alliance or another organization, and I extend this even to churches, and maybe even especially to churches, the invitation for a conversation, for dialogue to take place. That's something that I'm interested in. If you're interested in talking to me, Jeremiah.Bannister gmail.com.
All right. Thank you, Jeremiah, and I want to thank you for being my guest tonight. I know I don't have the fancy background that I usually have. I've been on location tonight.
It's a big bummer. I was bummed.
Yeah.
Right.
But on Thursday, I should be back in my studio as well as next week. And next week's show may be a little interesting, folks, because I have yet to have a guest. And the main thrust of this show is to interview a guest. So if I don't have a guest for next week, we may take, maybe not the full hour, but maybe some time to talk about some things and catch up on some of the current event stories. We'll see how that goes. Obviously, this would go to Jeremiah. It would go to anybody else who's a fan and watched the show. If you'd like to be a part of the show, if you'd like to be on the show, I'm always open to having unique and interesting guests who have a great perspective on things. But you just can't be, Bob25759 and talking about how much you like Barbies or something like that, or something very obscure. You gotta have an interesting point of view that people might care about. But it has been a pleasure.
Yes.
I thank you all, and stay safe, stay warm. In the immortal words of one of my favorite all-time characters, I can't do it, but live long and prosper. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and have a great night. Thank you very much.